I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck. Okay. Hey guys, welcome to episode 66. I'm Jenna.
I'm Danielle.
And today we are wrapping up our intuitive eating mini-series. We are covering intuitive eating principle number 10, which is called Honor Your Health with Gentle Nutrition.
And I will dive in with the little blurb that's at the beginning of each principle chapter. Make food choices that honor your health and taste buds while making you feel good. Remember that you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. You will not suddenly get a nutrient deficiency or become unhealthy from one snack, one meal, or one day of eating. It's what you eat consistently over time that matters. Progress, not perfection, is what counts. So, I feel like this is like a grand finale. Well, you know, we're not ending the podcast, but like everything we've ever talked about kind of leads up to we've been talking about like intuitive eating, and this is the hardcore, if you will, nutrition aspect of that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's really like nothing new that we haven't been talking to you guys about for the past year and a half. And so my hope is that like listening to these in order or doing your own learning with reading the book or using the workbook, that it will kind of reinforce that things are not in fact as serious when it comes to nutrition for the large majority of us, as our culture makes it out to be.
Yeah.
And it also is worth noting again that focusing on eating well is not really possible until you have established a healthy relationship with food, whatever that looks like for you, because otherwise it really easily gets turned into another diet, which is oftentimes like right now clean eating, quote unquote, and the wellness diet is kind of what this could morph into, just trying to eat well.
Yeah.
As a dietitian, obviously, I think that nutrition is important for health. Like, there is science to that. We can't argue that fact. But we always are talking about how it's not the most important thing for our health. And I just wanted to quickly touch on some of those other things that are as, if not more, impactful on our health, because I think we all need to be reminded of this. What we eat all day, every day, like, it's so frequent. We have to grocery shop regularly, like, we have to think about what we're going to eat for those meals, and so I think that the nutrition aspect takes up so much of our time, especially when you're in a disordered place, that some of these other things, like overall impacting your life, may or may not feel as like pressing, and especially because we're taught that like you can do a quick cleanse and suddenly your body is gonna be all new and healthy and everything, and that's really not how things work. So I think it gets really blown out of proportion. So social determinants of health is something that hopefully you're hearing more and more of. I think that has been talked about a lot more often in the past couple of years, and basically that's meaning like where you're living, your environmental factors, your economic factors, your race, things like that. And like where you live can impact your ability to get health care, where you live can impact your access to having safe drinking water or the ability to get to a grocery store that actually has produce at it. And so things like that, as well as thinking about the stress that dealing with basically not having the utmost privilege in society puts on us. And we know that that impacts health. We know that weight stigma impacts health. And that's not exactly the same thing, but that reminds me, like, that's a parallel for sure. So just considering all of those things. And I think if that is not something that you personally are experiencing as like a negative influencer to your health, just trying to like take a step back and consider that other people have those things going on. Because basically for the last, I don't know how many decades, we've chalked it up to people are fat because they eat too much. They don't have self-control, XYZ. And besides bodies being allowed to be different sizes, there's a lot of other things that go on to impact our health, and we do not talk about them nearly as much as we talk about the nutrition, which is kind of what I was getting at when I started talking about this section. So social connection is another thing that impacts our health. You've probably heard, like, the first thing that comes to mind is like studies about older people like living alone and how they can start to deteriorate. But just like we are social creatures, there are obviously different preferences for social interaction that we all have with being introverts or extroverts or whatnot, but it's important to have a social connection for you to thrive, and that is proven with science. And the other thing is adverse childhood experiences, which is also known as ACEs. And I actually just learned about this particular, it's actually like a test you can take. It's a quick thing when I first started at my new job at the eating disorder facility. But basically it's like this list of adverse experiences that you can have as a young person that are traumas that are going to predispose you to a lot of things that can negatively impact your health, like in addition to what trauma in and of itself does to a body. So it's a lot more that's impacting our health than our culture wants us to think. And then like this stuff isn't really marketable other than, I guess, therapy. And I think social connection a little bit. Like there is some marketing, but I don't see that anywhere at the rate of what we hear when it comes to nutrition being the thing,
Right.
That impacts our health.
Yeah, I was glad it touched on that because, like you're saying, like you literally never hear, at least like on terms of like a media level, all of these things that you just touched on, or at least it's not frequently. It's always like talking about how nutrition is the end all be all when it comes to your health and how like exercise is the end all be all. And people get so caught up thinking that those are the only two things, when in reality, it's like those are just a small fraction of the whole puzzle. Yet we're so hyper focused on just that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pulling up the ACE quiz because I think because we're talking about it, it's an interesting thing to look at.
Is it just a quiz that you as an individual take to see, like, you answer questions about your life?
Yeah, so basically there's 10 things. They showed this to us. Let me make sure I'm doing it correctly. Oh, so this is on NPR. They actually have a like full-on quiz, but essentially the things are: did you experience physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse? Were you physically neglected? Were you emotionally neglected? Was there mental illness in your household? Did you have incarcerated relatives? Was there substance abuse in your household? Was your mother treated violently? And was there divorce in your household? So they have it like on NPR. I can throw the link when we post this episode just because this is super interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously outside of our scope of practice, but just like an interesting thing to like learn about, but abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And so this isn't like a sentence that your life will be ruined, but I think we all know that these are not good things to have experiences as children, but just it has this list underneath of like basically the rougher your childhood, the higher your score is likely to be for lack of physical activity, for smoking, for alcoholism, for drug use, for missed work, for it says severe obesity, which I don't super love that being anywhere. It actually doesn't have eating disorders on here, which I'm interested to see because I feel like that's really tied in. But diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. Like those are things that have been found. So it's done a lot, like in the eating disorder world with, obviously there's well, this may not be obvious to people, but there's oftentimes, more often than not, trauma with people who have eating disorders. And so just like figuring out exactly what's going on. This is just like a quick little assessment. So I just find this super interesting. And again, like mental health being so important, these things definitely impact our overall physical well-being as well as our mental well-being. And it's not all about nutrition.
Surprise, surprise.
I know. It's crazy.
I mean, it makes sense, though, because, like, you hear all the time through whether it's social media or, like, just, you know, the media in general that, like, food is either, like, killing or it's healing you. Like, there's not really an in-between, so it places this, like, overemphasis on food, and it's like, well, okay, no wonder all of us or so many of us feel so obsessed with food and, like, get obsessed with these trends. And, like, I think the book gave the example of the lemon water with like cayenne pepper and honey for like burning fat. And it's like people like cling to these ideas because they're like terrified and think like, oh my gosh, like I'm either killing myself or healing myself based on like what I put in my body. And it's just so extreme.
Yeah, I agree. And also that concoction must be so very foul to consume, and we'd be willing to do anything to
burn fat. Yep.
It's a bunch of nonsense. Like in a broader sense, I do not think like at an individual level, if people are being influenced by this, that like you are unintelligent or anything like that, but obviously we are haters of diet culture. So we make it way too difficult, I think, in part because we're always being told something like comes out new with nutrition science, that like in the 90s fat was bad and now carbs are bad, and I don't know if protein will ever be bad. Well, you know, it kind of is demonized with veganism and like being plant-based, like oh, this is too much protein, eat it all from broccoli and rice. Okay, come talk to me after you eat a satisfying enough bowl full of just broccoli and rice.
Ugh.
Yeah, and then we'll chat. So the thing that I think is important to remember is because it's changing so often, like that it's changing often. So it's more of like, it's information, but it's not the end all be all, because if we actually like knew the perfect way to eat, we wouldn't keep doing all of this. And that's the thing too with nutrition science that is so problematic, is they're often not accounting for these other things that impact health. And so we can't even say most of the time that something in our diets is overall impacting us in a certain way, because we're not taking into account how people are living besides what they're putting in their mouth. And so it's just always coming back to that with thinking about how we take this information into account, because it's nutrition science is difficult. Like, it's hard to completely isolate one thing to determine whether it's going to impact you or not. And most of us don't eat the same exact thing all day, every day anyway, and we shouldn't, because that is quite disordered. So again, it wouldn't, like, going back to that little blurb at the beginning, one thing you eat is not going to make or break your health status. And that's where I think orthorexia really comes into play, is because it creates this fear of literally not being able to put, like, processed food, for example, into our bodies because we're scared of what it will do. And I am not condemning people for wanting to have awareness of what they're consuming or what's in their environment, but when it becomes something that's, like, controlling your life, that's where it's becoming a disordered thing, and then you're negatively impacting your health anyway. So you get stuck between a rock and a hard place there, which is why I've never briefly bought into that camp, but as a dietitian, never have, like, pressed people on that. But once I realized the harm, because everything I've ever looked at, for what it's worth, this is way more important and serious than, like, fighting diet culture, healing relationship with food, than what could possibly happen to you by not eating perfectly. So yeah.
Just for definition, for people who maybe have never heard that term or don't understand it, can you just, like, give an exact definition of the orthorexia eating disorder?
Yeah.
Or from your professional opinion, like, how you
so
see it.
basically, I'll pull it up. I actually don't think it's in the DSM. It's just, like, a commonly known issue. But at least when this book was published last year, it still wasn't in the DSM. But basically, like, it's being completely obsessed with every single thing that you put in your body, and that may sound a lot like some of the symptoms of anorexia, but it's like someone died basically of malnutrition because they've ran out of things that they thought were acceptable to eat, and it didn't really come out of the drive for thinness as much as, like, the drive for health. So the National Eating Disorders .org, NEDA, the association, says that it's not formally diagnosed in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental health. But it was coined in 1998 and means an obsession with proper or healthful, quote unquote, eating. Although being aware of and concerned with the nutritional quality of the food you eat isn't a problem in and of itself, people with orthorexia become so fixated on so-called healthy eating that they actually damage their own well-being. So some of the warning signs and symptoms of this are compulsive checking of ingredient lists and nutritional labels, an increase in concern about the health of ingredients, cutting out an increased number of food groups like all sugar, all carbs, all dairy, all meat, all animal products, etc., an inability to eat anything but a narrow group of foods that are deemed quote-unquote healthy or pure, unusual interest in the health of what others are eating, spending hours per day thinking about what food might be served at upcoming events, showing high levels of distress when safe or healthy foods are not available, obsessive following of food and healthy lifestyle blogs on Twitter and Instagram, and body image concerns may or may not be present. So I think that's the biggest thing that separates is we think, like, being thin, oftentimes we connotate that with health, but, like, in the eating disorder world, that's it kind of is separated with these two things. But yeah, this is, like, a very real, and I would even say rampant. I obviously don't have a statistic on it, but I hear this stuff all the time, and, like, you and I both suffered from, like, feeling terrified about all of these things at one point. And doing them, kind of wasting our time, essentially. And then just like we do with all eating disorders, like exposing ourselves to these things and making sure that we can learn that we're going to be okay even when we consume them. And obviously psychotherapy is going to be important for this. But yeah, so that's orthorexia in a nutshell. I don't even remember where I was going with that, to be honest. I'm glad we talked about it, but I have no idea what my train of thought was.
Sorry, I distracted you.
Okay. I'm glad you asked. I don't know what I was saying. That's okay. If I think of it, I'll come back. So basically, we think we have to be in this constant state of self-monitoring, but really, if you give your body and brain the permission to like calm down, and of course if you have access to food, this regulation is going to happen on its own. And that's where the big debate with intuitive eating always comes into play. Like, I have to be on top of it, I can't eat this, blah 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 blah. But really and truly, if we take that step back, then you gain more control over what you do for your body because you're able to listen again. And like we talk about, like the brain and body knowledge come together. And that actually segues us into the action steps because in the book, the authors talk about authentic health being a combination of inner attunement and external values. And that's essentially what Jenna and I always talk about, like our brain and body knowledge. Because no, I do not think that you can or should rely on your body to wait and tell you that you have a deficiency and you start craving something to get your nutrients. Yes, using your brain and body knowledge is important, because if we just relied on our bodies to like give us cues that we had a nutritional deficiency, like that is going to be unhelpful. Like, I think we know enough about basic nutrition needs that we should utilize that for sure, but also not forcing ourselves to eat things because we think that we have to in order to be the healthiest. And that's where that like disciplined mindset comes into play that I think is truly a load of garbage when it comes to nutrition.
Yeah.
Another action step is redefining moderation. So I have a personal problem with this word because I think it has become so negatively connotated to like guilt. Like, oh, it's okay to eat brownies in moderation. For example, what I hear when I hear that is like, don't eat too many brownies or you're going to gain weight and then you're going to be unacceptable and unhealthy in our society that values thinness over everything. And brownies are bad. Like, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
And the technical definition of moderation is the avoidance of excess or extremes. And I think because we put things off limits, well, I don't think we know that that can cause us to just be completely unregulated with what we consume, but also like thinking of it in a different way of don't excessively avoid things. And we don't think of it that way. So like it really encompasses all foods. We just have taken that word like we've done with so many things and made it into something that means it's like a diet culture word.
Yeah.
And if that word is like triggering at all, because I personally don't like to use that word, but I think it's inevitable because like it's even used in this chapter of the book. Like, it's so hard to describe like the ideas that we're saying without using it, but I don't like it. So if we're gonna use it, I think we at least need to take a look at what we mean by it, because you do not need someone outside of yourself telling you how much to eat. And when we usually hear that, it's like when we're on that fence between being heavily immersed in diet culture and like not, and we're saying, oh, give permission, but not too much permission. And that's useless. Like, it's nice, like, great, like, I'm glad we're starting to think about it, but that's not going to overall make a change because we're still thinking that that thing is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And, like, a reminder, this is kind of annoying, but, like, too much water is harmful. Too much of like, eating too much fiber is harmful. Like, we only think about it in these foods that our culture has labeled to be bad, quote unquote, and it is just fully out of context. So that's my rant on the definition of moderation. Eat things you like to eat. That's like probably the number one action step here. Healthy food, quote unquote, has been co-opted to mean like giant bowls of raw produce, essentially, is like what you have to do. Like, I feel like that's the visual that always comes to mind, and that's pretty ridiculous. I understand why we think that, but if you put salad dressing on, like, or even that's relatively normal, but like if we dip vegetables into ranch dressing, for example, it does not negate the nutritional value of your vegetables. And so same with like putting cheese on things or using oil to cook vegetables or butter. Like, it's not taking away from that. It's enhancing the flavor, which makes it more enjoyable to eat and more satisfying. So I think my biggest thing here is like allowing yourself to consume the foods the way you enjoy them. If you've grown up in a family and you've never really been encouraged to try eating like fruits or vegetables or whole grains, I think you have to practice too of like the different ways you like things, because I can think of certain pieces of produce or proteins or complex carbohydrates or non-complex that I like one way, but I don't prefer them another way. And I think that's part of what makes us unique people, is we have different preferences, and that's okay to explore.
Yeah, and it's also like when you give yourself the freedom to explore all of these things, like you can actually like uncover what it is that you do truly enjoy and what you like. Like the other night we were making something and I turned to Landon and I was like, I've discovered over the course of like this journey of like allowing myself to eat whatever I want, like trying everything and like not having any like rules, I was like, I really like cheese. And I was like, I never let myself eat that for like a period of time because of the unhealthy label that I felt I had placed on it because of like the rules within diet culture. And granted, I have to be careful with that just because of like my autoimmune issue, but like I genuinely, like, I'm like, wow, I love the taste, I love the texture, like it enhances like food, like with the flavor. And I was like, to think that I deprived myself of this forever just in the name of quote unquote health, like it's like, it's sad that so many people are doing that. And yeah, it just gives you like insight and clues to like the things that you enjoy, and why wouldn't you want to experience things you enjoy?
Yeah, the book was making me laugh when they talked about this part, because they were describing like certain health foods that taste like garbage. And I'm not saying that none of them do taste good. Like, I actually really enjoy eating tofu, which a lot of people think is super weird, but I like it. But like some of the things like the super low calorie salad dressings and like things like that, and they're just not like, that is not it. And I remember when I'm obsessed with that Tessemae's brand that we both like. And when I first was telling people about that at my old job, I just always had to say the disclaimer, but it's not low calorie, because I knew they were going to like flip that I was telling them to eat this like delicious and like great quality food enhancer, but it actually had like a lot of calories in it, which is just funny because I had to give that warning. I felt like I did in that place. But cheese, avoiding cheese, actually, that you said that was the thing that, like, got me to stop following that clean eating plan that I've talked about from the influencer that makes me angry. Because I was like, wait, I like this. Why am I not eating this?
Like, why would I cut it out? Yeah.
So, yeah. There's something else that I wanted to share, and I already have Friday brain, and it's only Tuesday.
I know.
So we're doing good. I think it'll come back to me.
Did you say Wednesday evening? Because it's definitely Tuesday.
Did I?
I thought I heard Wednesday, but maybe I'm just subliminally wishing it was Wednesday, because that's one day closer to Friday.
Yes, it is only Tuesday. Who knows what I said. But yeah. Gosh, it was good, whatever I had to say. I hope it'll come back. What other thoughts do you have before I dig into, like, some of the guidelines, if you will?
I just liked how it touched on it. We've, like, said this 1,000 times, so if you're, like, not new to the podcast and this is not new information, but, like, having a healthy relationship with foods, like, it doesn't mean that you're morally superior or inferior based on your eating choices, because, like, your eating selection is not a reflection of your character. So just, like, if you finally are at a place where you allow all these foods that used to scare you, or that, like, society deems as, like, unhealthy, or you stayed away from so long, like, that doesn't, like, reflect you as a person. Like, that doesn't mean you're bad because now you're, like, starting to eat these, like, foods that are labeled bad in this society. Like, you're actually, like, challenging it, and, like, that should make you feel, like, empowered, because you're, like, going against the grain and trying to, like, unlearn and undo all of the habits and the lies that, like, diet culture has, like, tried to impose on you. And it's like you're taking your freedom back. So just, like, try to, by doing all these things that, like, we're talking about and that Danielle is touching on tonight, like, it's going to help you, like, remove that guilt and, like, that morality that you might feel from eating, and, like, the choices that you make. And our hope is that, like, by doing these things, you're actually going to, like, feel that freedom and, like, gain confidence with your ability to choose, like, and make decisions for yourself, regardless of, like, all of the noise that you hear all around you from diet culture telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing and consuming.
Yeah. I think it's always worth repeating.
Yeah.
Because many times as we talk about that, I think it needs to be said, because as many years as we've heard and our listeners have heard the opposite, it takes so much time to, like, really believe it.
Yeah.
Ooh, I remembered what I was going to say. When I was still, like, really stuck in my clean eating phase and was just, like, obsessed with making sure we had the healthiest possible dinners, I remember always getting, like, hungry or wanting something after, and I don't get that as much. Like, occasionally I'll want dessert, but it's not, like, a habit, I would say, or it's not something I feel like I always need to have something else. But, like, I can see a marked difference between when I was not eating truly satisfying food. Like, sure, it was good, but it was, like, missing what I need in a meal in order to, especially if I've had a day where I've been too busy to eat as much as I would like during the day, and I'm, like, and we know that's not ideal, but, like, I need to make sure I get that meal to be, like, as satisfying as possible. Like, if things have gotten crazy, and if you're focusing so much on, I have to eat just this perfectly clean, healthy meal, it usually isn't. Like, there's usually something that's missing, like fats or some type of carbohydrate, like, I find, or both sometimes. And I just think that's interesting, because obviously this is not, like, an advertisement for how to eat less, but just when you can actually honor your body, you may not be craving something else 20 minutes after you ate dinner because you didn't actually give yourself what you needed. And I was concerned with myself for doing that, for, like, expanding the horizons of our pantry and our refrigerator. But it's been nothing but positive, I think, for my overall well-being and just, like, enjoyment of food. Okay, so we certainly cannot wrap up this episode without talking about kind of some gentle nutrition, overarching suggestions and guidelines for how to eat a balanced diet. And this is something that I always tread lightly, because certainly like I said, I believe in nutrition. I want to give nutrition education. I just find that most people already know way more about nutrition than they need me to tell them. It's about giving permission for things and kind of figuring out how to best fuel yourself in the sense of for activity or for just getting through the day, or the meal planning stuff. I think that's where I become more useful as a dietitian, just after being one for almost 4 years. But coming back to things that we for sure need to do for ourselves. So we have the 6 classes of nutrients. Our macronutrients are our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our fats. Our micronutrients are our minerals and vitamins, and then we have water. So the way we can get all of that in our day is by consuming a variety of colors and types of food, which is one thing that getting super obsessed about what you're eating can be limiting in. We do tend to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, well, in that way of thinking, but it's just a lot of things end up being put off limits. But eating fruits and vegetables, ideally several servings a day. But I think this is one of those things we've talked about with exercise. If you're looking at it as this thing I have to check off and kind of choke down, and it's a punishment, because we're taught, they talked about this in the book, so many kids are told eat your vegetables and then you can have dessert, and all that says is vegetables are bad and a dessert is my reward for eating this thing that I can't tolerate. And that's really toxic and ridiculous. I get why parents would do that, but that's not super helpful to this huge group of foods that is so essential to our vitality. And I don't care if you eat fresh, frozen, or canned fruits and vegetables. Put fat on them, prepare them different ways, mix them in with the food. They don't have to be this boring side dish. But yeah, try and work on that, and in a healthy way. So that's where all of this stuff, if any of this is triggering, you're not ready for this yet, which is why it's at the end of the book anyway, and there's no right or wrong answer as to when this is appropriate. I'll say too, in eating disorder recovery, getting people to eat fruits and vegetables is literally the last thing I care about, because it is, yes, it is important, but in the grand scheme of everything else that's going on, when we have a disorder relationship with food, it is not the most important. Which sounds so crazy for a dietitian to say, but I stand by that. Eating complex carbohydrates that have fiber to them, so whole grains, but also sweet potatoes is another example, or winter squash. Getting fiber, B vitamins, lots of good things in that group. So the recommendation is to try and get half of your grains to be whole grains. That's kind of how to do that, but a lot of people eat a wider variety of those things anyway. But that's the suggestion, just to get the nutrients in. Making sure we don't skimp on fats, especially ones that provide omega-3s, are really health promoting, and fish is a big source of that. Lots of different oils, avocado, flaxseed, those types of foods. You probably often hear them described as heart healthy fats, but making sure we're doing those. They also help our body to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, and they provide satiety. So it's not just about the functions that it serves our body in the sense of protecting our ourselves and like making sure our neurotransmitters work and all that stuff, it's like it helps us overall have a healthy relationship with food. Getting protein at all of your meals and snacks to some degree is helpful, because with that and fiber, it helps to keep you fuller longer, which basically means you're fueling yourself better, because we need fuel. So if we're eating something that we like straight up simple carbohydrates and then we kind of go through that quickly, it's not the most sustaining thing. So that's where that is coming from. And then hydrating. So yes, other fluids than water count, except for alcohol. But like trying to drink water, you do not have to drink a set gallon of water every single day. I really would recommend like looking at your pee, and if it's pale yellow to clear, you are good to go there, unless there's a medical condition. I will say that's a caveat to anything we talk about with this, with exercise or nutrition recommendations, is we don't know any like individual medical conditions. So yeah, those like really that's it. Like I don't need to give you a grocery list of the products you have to buy. I just saw like advertisements for something like that today, and I was like, that is why I'm so passionate about what I do, because not that it's unhelpful to give people ideas. Like I think that's wonderful, like to try different things, but like to feel like you don't know how to go to the grocery store and buy things for yourself. I think then like again, you got to work on healing your relationship with food before that's going to even feel possible, because it's so much less intense and serious once we do that work. And it's not easy work, but it's like beyond worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it feels almost like unexciting in a way to like when I give nutrition education, and there really is so much more we could nerd out about, but I really genuinely like everything that we said in this episode. Like I believe with my entire being and like my knowledge as a dietitian that we take this stuff way too seriously, and it is okay to like, and encouraged to just chill out a little bit. And when you're ready, like I think the epitome of it is realizing without judgment that you need something different, and being allowed to keep all kinds of foods in your house are kind of like two key things that show you that you're doing it. Like the book gave an example about her, one of the, I forget which author it was, but her son went to an amusement park and came home and said that he'd been eating like junky, quote unquote, and he wanted like a healthy dinner. So like his body was probably craving hydration and like things other than what you can get at an amusement park. And I think that's really cool, because in that example, like it's not coming from guilt, it's coming from my body wants this.
Yeah.
And if you're not guilt tripping yourself for it, it makes it really easy to allow that, rather than the self-sabotage of just like continuing to eat the same way because you've already ruined the day, which is a super easy trap to fall into. And then like additionally allowing all those things to be around so that you can make, like you have to plan in some degree to have food around, but so you can make the choice more in the moment, and it doesn't become like, oh, I don't have chocolate in my house because I can't control the chocolate, so then chocolate's everything that you can think about, and then you binge on it, and that's not intuitive at all. So I think those are some additional like ways to kind of check, and if those feel unmanageable, you didn't fail. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just likely there's some more like deep diving that needs to be done. And I think that the principles provided by Elise Rush and Evelyn Tribole for intuitive eating, like it's extremely thorough in like the things we need to work on. It's just that everyone's going to be a little individualized on like how you do that work, I think, and like what resonates with you, which is why we did this series, to like talk about what like we've used and like what it means to us as a dietitian and a personal trainer, like, to be intuitive eaters.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts as we wrap up our series? I feel like this took us forever to do. I'm excited.
I know. I mean, not really. The only thing I have to say, I think, is like, we say this all the time, give yourself grace as you're like embarking on this journey. And not to say that it doesn't come easy. Like, it's going to require work for you to have to like unlearn all of these things. But I feel like when you're consistently like working out all this stuff and you really truly are at a place where you like start to give yourself like this freedom all of the time, it just kind of happens. And I know that like that won't be the case, like that may not be the case for everyone, but like it just is like a process where eventually like you'll realize, or a little thing will be like, oh my gosh, like you'll look at it in hindsight and be like, that's growth. Like something won't bother you, or you'll just like all these little things that we're telling you to like implement, like once you consciously do them and like consistently, like to the best of your ability, like allow, like while giving yourself freedom, like it just kind of happens.
I agree.
Like when people ask me like, how did, like on Instagram, like how did you get to this place where like you're at where you're at? I'm like, honest, like you do all this work, but like one day you're just like, oh my gosh, like it's just not, it's not an issue like it used to be. I don't really know like how else to put it, almost, because you're like, it just kind of happens over time. It's like you go back to like the way that we were almost like created to go about this.
Yeah, for sure.
If that makes any sense.
No, I think it does. I agree. If you guys have any like questions on any of these things, or want more clarification on it, we'd love to hear from you on that, to kind of elaborate further. So always send us a DM, or feel free to send us a DM or shoot us an email at fitfueledfree@gmail.com. You can keep up with what we've got going on our shared Instagram page at fitfueledfree, and our personal pages. Mine is at Dietitian Dani Cast, and Jenna's is Jen Ep Fit. Don't forget to check out her app and subscribe if you haven't already. Level Up Fit, and give us a rating, review, tell your friends, because it's 2021 and we're still podcasting. Also, we're on YouTube. We've been video recording. I know we've talked about this, but we're still doing that. So if you prefer to watch that way, that's an option as well. So thank you guys so much for listening to this series, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
Bye, guys.